Welcome back to Spooky History Hole, where we explore history's darkest secrets. Tonight we're stepping into the real Harrisville farmhouse behind the Conjuring. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and let me know what story you think I should cover next. Let's begin. It started like most haunted stories do, with a family just trying to start over. In January of 1971, Roger and Carolyn Perron packed up their 5 daughters and moved into a sprawling 18th century farmhouse tucked deep in the woods of Harrisville, Rhode Island. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. 200 acres of quiet fields, weathered barns, and stone fences that looked older than the country itself. A place where you could breathe. From the moment they turned up the dirt drive, something about the house felt watchful. Not evil, not yet, just aware. The kind of stillness that makes you feel like someone else is holding their breath with you. The house was a pale wooden skeleton with a sagging porch and glass that distorted its reflections, like it wasn't sure which century it belonged to. The first warning came from the man who sold them the place. He was polite, soft-spoken, the kind of older New Englander who measured every word before saying it. As he handed Roger the keys, he hesitated, just for a heartbeat. Then he said quietly, "For your family's sake, you might want to keep the lights on at night." It sounded like a joke, the way small towns like to tease outsiders. The Perrons laughed about it all the way up the drive. But that night, when the girls were tucked in and the house had settled into its nighttime rhythm, the laughter faded. Old houses make sounds, everyone knows that. Boards pop when the temperature drops. Pipes hum, doors sigh. But this was different. It was the sense that the sounds were waiting for them to fall asleep. The girls heard soft knocks from inside the walls. A draft moved through their room, even though every window was latched. Then came a touch, gentle, deliberate, pulling the edge of a blanket down toward the floor. Andrea, the oldest, felt a weight press against her bed, like someone sitting down beside her. Before she could open her eyes, she felt a soft kiss on her forehead, and then the faint scent of fruit and flowers. She thought it was her mother. It had to be. But when she asked Carolyn about it the next morning, her mother shook her head. That became the first unspoken rule of the farmhouse. You didn't talk about what you saw or heard. Everyone was trying to be strong, trying to make the new house feel like home. Roger was gone most weeks, driving long hours for his job. And Carolyn didn't want to scare the girls. But she noticed the same oddities. Tools moving places. Brooms shifting across the kitchen when she turned her back. A cold pocket in the center of the living room that no fire could warm. It was easy to explain away at first. The girls were curious, maybe mischievous. The house was old. Logic covered everything. Until it didn't. Because every morning, without fail, each clock in the house stopped at exactly 5:15 a.m. Not broken, just paused. When Roger rewound them, they'd tick again, only to die at the same time the next night. On the third morning, Carolyn found the pendulum from the hallway clock swinging on its own, steady and silent, while the hands stayed frozen. Still, she told herself it was just a coincidence. That's how hauntings work in the beginning. They let you find excuses. They let you talk yourself out of the truth. But by the end of the first winter, the Perrons began to understand that whatever shared those walls with them wasn't planning to leave. and it didn't appreciate being ignored. By February, the farmhouse no longer felt like a home. It felt like something else, alive in its own way, breathing through its floors, whispering through its pipes. The days were manageable. Sunlight made it easier to pretend that nothing was wrong. But when night came, the house began to move again. The girls started describing things that didn't make sense. Footsteps pacing the hallway long after their parents went to bed. Doors that clicked open by themselves, then softly shut, as if someone was tucking them in. The smell of fruit and flowers, the same scent from that first night, lingered for weeks. At first, it was almost comforting. But one morning, Andrea noticed her little sister Cindy sitting at the foot of her bed, pale and trembling. When Andrea asked what was wrong, Cindy said she heard voices coming from inside the walls. Not mice, not the wind. Voices that sounded like they were trying to be quiet, but couldn't help themselves. "They're saying something," she whispered. They said there are 7 soldiers, 7 dead soldiers in the walls. Andrea didn't tell her parents at first. The family had learned to live with strange things, objects disappearing, chairs sliding across the floor when no one was near. Their mother had even joked that the ghosts were helpful. Once, Carolyn came into the kitchen to find a small pile of dirt swept neatly into the corner, broom leaning against the wall, like someone had finished the job for her. They called that one the friendly ghost. But friendly doesn't last. It started in the barn one afternoon. The girls were playing tag between the hay bales, and Christine suddenly screamed. By the time Carolyn reached her, Christine was standing stiff as a board, face drained of color. She said something had grabbed her arm, something she couldn't see, and shoved her into the wall. Later that night, faint red marks appeared where she said fingers had been. Then came the mornings, always the same. 5:15 a.m. The smell of rotting flesh moved through the house like smoke, forcing everyone out of bed. They searched for dead animals, checked the cellar, even tore apart the old pantry walls. Nothing. The air would just turn sour and then vanish again, leaving behind silence that felt heavier than before. Carolyn began to change. She stopped sleeping. She kept candles burning at all hours. Sometimes she'd stand in the hallway, eyes half focused, as if she was listening to something that the rest of them couldn't hear. When Roger asked what was wrong, she said she kept seeing a woman in gray standing near their bed. "She was right there," Carolyn said. Her mouth moved, but I couldn't understand her. Then she got close and said, "Get out. I'll drive you out with death and gloom." Roger tried to calm her, but the moment he turned away, a picture frame fell off the wall and shattered. The glass cut his hand open. He still has the scar. The girls began to sense that whatever lived there wasn't just a collection of old souls drifting through. There was something specific, something angry, and for reasons they couldn't explain, it had chosen their mother as its favorite. By spring, the farmhouse had stopped pretending. The laughter that once filled its rooms was replaced by whispers and the constant sound of footsteps that never led anywhere. Carolyn had started to keep notes, little details that didn't fit together, but somehow told a story. The clock stopping at 5:15, the smell that came and went, the voices the girls heard in the walls. She needed proof for herself, proof that she wasn't losing her mind. The more she searched, the worse the house felt. One evening, while Roger was away, she lit a candle and began walking through the rooms. When she reached the parlor, the flame leaned sideways, though there was no draft. The air turned colder than the outside winter air. And from somewhere above her came a sound, a dragging scrape, like furniture being moved across an attic floor. But their attic was empty. That same night, she woke to find a figure standing near her bed. It wasn't a shadow. It had texture, as if the darkness itself had weight. The figure wore the outline of a long gray dress, and its face was blurred, like someone had smudged it away. Then came the voice again. "Get out. I'll drive you out with death and gloom." She screamed. But by the time Roger reached the room, the air was empty again. The next morning, Carolyn went into town, desperate for answers. When she mentioned the address, the older woman behind the counter at the general store went quiet. Then she said, "You bought the old Arnold property?" The woman told her about a name, Bathsheba Sherman, though some called her Bathsheba Thayer. She lived nearby in the 1800s, and according to local lore, had been accused of witchcraft. They said she'd sacrificed a child to the devil before hanging herself from a tree near the property. No trial, no conviction, but the story stuck to her like a curse. Carolyn didn't want to believe it. But when she went home and checked the oldest gravestones near the property, she found the name Bathsheba carved into one of them. The stone was cracked in half, the soil around it sunken, like it had been disturbed. After that day, the strange things inside the farmhouse started to revolve around her. She'd wake up with bruises in the shape of hands. The broom that once cleaned on its own now shattered across the kitchen floor. Sometimes she'd feel breath on the back of her neck, cold, human breath, only to turn and see nothing but the kitchen window fogging on its own. The girls noticed the change too. They said their mother didn't look the same anymore. Her eyes looked hollow, her voice quieter, her movements slower. It was as if the house was learning her rhythm, syncing itself to her pulse. Then one afternoon, while mending a torn sheet, Carolyn pricked her finger and let out a small gasp. Blood welled up instantly. But when she blinked, she swore the drop that hit the floor didn't spread. It sank straight into the wood, like the house had swallowed it. By then, even Roger couldn't deny it. He'd heard footsteps when no one was home. Tools vanished and turned up days later in impossible places. And once, when he was working in the barn, a rusted chain dropped from the rafters and wrapped around his arm as if someone had thrown it. Whatever was in that house wasn't satisfied with fear anymore. It wanted belonging. It wanted claim. And for some reason, it had chosen Carolyn to prove it could still own something in this world. By summer, the Perrons had reached a breaking point. The house no longer felt like it had moods. It had intentions. Some days it lulled them into a false peace, and others it lashed out like a living thing. Carolyn had stopped eating. She'd started keeping a Bible in every room, but she didn't read from it. She just wanted the pages there, as if the words themselves could stand guard. It was a family friend named Barbara who finally stepped in. She'd been close with Carolyn for years and had seen the bruises, the exhaustion, and the strange behavior. Barbara attended a lecture in Connecticut by a pair of paranormal investigators named Ed and Lorraine, who had built a reputation after their work on the Amityville case. When the lecture ended, Barbara waited in line just to tell them about the family she feared wouldn't last another winter. Within a week, the Warrens showed up at the Harrisville farmhouse. Lorraine later said that the darkness inside the house clung to her like humidity the moment she crossed the threshold. They began documenting everything: cold spots, movements, voices. Ed asked questions into the air, and sometimes the recorder picked up answers. But it was Lorraine who said the name first. She claimed to sense a woman, angry, possessive, trapped between worlds, named Bathsheba. The Warrens recommended a séance, not an exorcism. They said it might encourage the entity to leave. The Perrons were hesitant, but Carolyn was desperate. She wanted her home back, or at least her mind. On a quiet night in the fall of 1973, the Warrens, the Perrons, and a small group of observers gathered in the basement. The air was already cold before they began. Candles flickered as Lorraine whispered prayers in Latin, her voice trembling slightly, even as she tried to sound calm. Carolyn sat in a wooden chair in the center of the room, hands clenched in her lap. The moment the séance started, the temperature dropped, like a wave crashing down. Andrea, the eldest daughter, had snuck to the top of the basement stairs to watch. Lorraine began calling out, "If there are spirits here, we invite you to speak." At first, nothing. Then the table beside her shifted half an inch across the floor. Ed whispered to keep going. Carolyn's head tilted back, her breathing slowed. Then her voice changed low, guttural, nothing like her own. She started speaking in fragments of a language no one recognized. The chair beneath her shook. Someone shouted for the Warrens to stop. But before they could, Carolyn's body lifted several inches off the ground. Andrea swore she saw her mother's eyes roll back. Her mouth opened wider than seemed possible. Then, without warning, the chair shot backward, slamming into the far wall. Carolyn hit the floor with a sound that still made Andrea's stomach turn years later when she remembered it. The séance ended in chaos. People were crying, praying, running for the stairs. When they finally helped Carolyn upstairs, she was shaking, whispering over and over, "It's not gone. It's not gone." Lorraine refused to talk publicly about what she saw that night. All she ever said later was, "It wasn't human." After that night, the Warrens continued visiting, but the damage was done. Whatever they stirred up in that basement hadn't been banished. It had been woken. And for the Perrons, the haunting wasn't over. It was only getting bolder. After the séance, nothing was the same. The farmhouse didn't just feel darker, it was darker. The lights dimmed on their own. The air seemed thicker. And silence itself felt like it had weight. Carolyn was fragile now, both physically and mentally. She'd wake up in places she didn't remember. Her clothes soaked with sweat, her hair tangled as though she'd been struggling in her sleep. Sometimes, when the girls came downstairs in the morning, they'd find every cabinet door open, chairs tipped over, and the Bible pages scattered across the floor like leaves after a storm. Roger grew more distant. He was a practical man, and practical men don't survive well in houses like that. He wanted to believe there was a rational explanation. Stress, mass hysteria, bad wiring, anything other than the idea that his wife might be sharing her body with something unseen. but he couldn't ignore the way the family dog whined at empty corners, or how the sound of a woman sobbing seemed to move through the walls, following him from room to room. In the years that followed, the Perrons stopped inviting people over. Their lives shrank to the perimeter of that house. Carolyn hardly went into town anymore. She said people looked at her differently, as if they could sense something following her too. One winter morning, Andrea woke to the familiar chill of 5:15 a.m. The air was sour again, that same smell of decay that always preceded something violent. She turned her head and saw her mother, standing in the hallway, her face half lit by the lamp glow. Only her eyes were open, and she was whispering. Andrea couldn't make out the words, but one phrase repeated between breaths. "She won't let me go." A month later, Carolyn's health began to fail. Her energy was gone. She spoke less, ate less. And when she did talk, she often referred to herself as we. The family didn't last much longer in that house. By 1980, they finally sold it, though for far less than it was worth, and left Rhode Island behind. They moved south to Georgia, chasing sunlight and new beginnings. But even there, they said the haunting followed them in pieces. Doors still opened at 5:15. Clocks froze for no reason. Carolyn would sometimes pause mid-sentence, staring at something behind her daughters, then blink it away like a dream. Years later, when the Perrons learned that Hollywood was making a film about their ordeal, the memories came rushing back. Andrea went to the set during production, but Carolyn didn't. She couldn't. During one of the interviews, while the family was being filmed, a sudden wind tore through the set, knocking over lights, cameras, and stands. When they later called home, they found out that at the same moment, Carolyn had fallen and broken her hip. When the family finally reached her in the hospital, she whispered something that sent chills through them all. She's angry. Bathsheba. She doesn't want to be remembered. Decades have passed, but the story refuses to rest. Every family who's lived in that farmhouse since has reported something strange. Lights, voices, footsteps, or that overwhelming sense that they're not alone. One owner, Norma Sutcliffe, tried to dismiss the legends, calling them exaggerated. But even she admitted to hearing people talking in empty rooms and seeing a flash of blue light dart across her walls. And whether you believe in ghosts or not, there's one thing about the Perrons' story that's impossible to deny. It changed them. Carolyn was never the same woman again. The children still speak carefully when they mention that house. Even now, Andrea says she sometimes dreams of it. The crooked beams, the cold floors, the sense of someone standing just behind her shoulder, waiting for her to turn around. The real story of The Conjuring isn't just about a haunting. It's about what happens when history decides it isn't finished with you, and the dead refuse to be forgotten, and when a house remembers its pain long after the people inside it are gone. That's the story of the real Harrisville haunting, as the people who lived it and the records that survive tell it. Comment with your thoughts, and leave me an idea for the next video. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more of history's darkest stories.